Hello, fellow modelers. Bruce here again. What we're going to look at today is another great scratch building project for beginners. This one is a shed that really is composed of two parts. One part is a peaked roof, four-sided shed with doors and windows, and then over time it's had two different additions added to it. Notice that we are dealing with different kinds of siding and different kinds of roofing, making this an interesting structure that can be placed just about anywhere on your layout. Follow along.
When building this shed, we're going to really look at it as two components. The first is the peaked roof shed with the doors and windows, and then second is the additions. So we would start by drawing a sketch of the main shed and then picking wall material. And I decided to use board and batten siding. And when laying out those sides, you try not to have a batten right along the edge because it would interfere with corner trim. If that's not possible, you're going to have to scrape the battens off at the corners with either a razor blade or a chisel blade in your X-Acto knife. Um, so yeah, going to lay those out and first just cut some oversized boards and then cut them to size and then cut the peaked roof in and the door openings and finally the window openings. And when doing the windows, now normally you've seen me drill a small hole in the corner of each window after I sketch them in place on the wood. But sometimes I also use this corner chisel from Micromark. And those chisels tend to displace wood when you tap on them with a hammer. And so I do two things to try to keep the wood from splitting. First is putting some masking tape on the back side of the wall, and the second is to drill a good sized hole in the middle of the window opening so that when the wood has to get displaced, it has a place to go. This seems to work. So yeah, that's how I cut these window and door openings. We're now getting ready to stain the wood for the walls and any other trim pieces and so forth that we're going to be using. But before we do that, I want to brace the scribe siding walls to either totally prevent or at least reduce warping. Uh, this time, instead of using plain alcohol and India ink stain or plain shoe dye or leather dye stain, I used a mixture. I put in a pint of isopropyl alcohol using an eyedropper, equal amounts of Higgins Black India ink and Fiebling's dark brown leather dye. I wish I could tell you how much of each I did. I just, took a half an eyedropper of each and shook it up, and if it was still not dark enough, I, added a little bit more of each and so forth. Um, so that's the stain I used. I applied on the scribe siding walls, both sides. I applied the stain with a brush, but any strip wood was submerged in a bath of the stain. As you can see, the combination of the India ink and the leather dye gave me a pretty decent look. Now it's time to consider what we're going to do on the corners of the buildings when we glue them together. You really have a couple choices. One is to use um, clapboard, or not clapboard, but 1x6 or 1x8s on the corners, like you see in one picture here of the dynamite shed, or you can use square corner posts, as you see in the other uh, picture that I've included here. I decided to use the square corner posts. One last thing to do before gluing the walls together would be to build that freight door and get that installed. Easier to do when it's flat on the bench. I've built these before in some of my other builds. I just cut boards to either 6 or 6.5 feet in length and glue them together edge to edge to form the width of the door. Put some Z bracing on it and then create a track on the building by using a styrene channel with the open side of the channel facing downward. It's a pretty effective way to do it. Here I'm gluing the first two walls together. That metal block that you see inside the walls is similar to a 1, 2, 3 block. It's something my father-in-law, who was a machinist, gave me. Uh, Works well for the purpose that you see me using it there. And other than that, I tend to use angle blocks, as you'll see in some of the other photographs. So once again, I'm gluing the four walls together two at a time in the forms of L's, and then gluing the two L's together to get the actual structure. In that last picture, you could see that the windows have glazing. They left the glazing out of a few panes to look like they were broken windows. I used Testor's Clear Parts Cement to do the window glazing. After putting a hanging light into the interior for some lighting effects, I added the roof. You can see I'm weighing it down while it dries with a sandbag. Then I added tar paper roofing and then weathered that roofing. That's the sequence that you see. And that completes part one of the build. Okay, for the second half of the build, we want to address those two additions I put on to the main shed. I'm showing you some pictures so you get an idea of what I wanted to achieve. On the first little addition, I wanted to have siding, individual boards, some of which had broken and fallen off, showing the framing underneath. And on the last little addition, I wanted to use a tar paper siding held in place by some slats. So as always, I started by drawing the diagrams for the sides of the new sheds. Um, and then they were to size, so I was able to start framing right over those diagrams. In these next few shots, you can see me framing the structure out, um, building right on top of the diagrams. You can see that I often cut the pieces for the framing right in place on top of my work. And then once the framing was done, I could start adding the siding. For the individual boards that I wanted to show as either missing or broken, um, I would sometimes just break the board in my fingers and then add it to the model. For the portion that's going to be covered in tar paper, I didn't have to, but I used individual boards as the subwalls and then covered it with the tar paper and then added the battens on top of that. With the walls done, it was time to work on the roofs. I started by adding some subroofs. And if you look in the pictures, you can see that those subroofs are tilted downhill a little bit, one going one direction, the other roof going a little bit the other direction. Then I added Campbell metal roofing on kind of like that middle shed and made the roof on the last shed, the one with the tar paper siding, the tar paper roof with some battens. Then I finished up by making a little tripod to hold a gooseneck lamp. And, that kind of finished up the project. So there's a few photos of the uh, group of sheds, attached sheds being done, and one of them with them in place on my old layout. This is my first attempt to do a voiceover still pictures, and I know that my voice sounds different in each segment, and sometimes there's quite an echo. So I'll work on that in the future if I do any more of these. Um, in the meantime, as always, I ask you if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll talk to you again very soon.